The morning they discharged me from St. Michael's, I stood on the sidewalk outside the main entrance and just breathed. November air in Toronto, sharp enough to make your eyes water, smelled like diesel and wet leaves and the coffee cart across the street. I stood there for maybe 2 full minutes, just breathing it in, and I thought, I am 63 years old. I nearly lost everything I spent 4 decades building, and the person who tried to take it from me is my own daughter. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this. I am not a man who holds grudges easily. I grew up in Sudbury, the son of a miner who came home every evening gray with nickel dust and never once complained. He taught me that you work, you build, you provide. You don't waste time being bitter. So when I tell you what my daughter did to me, I need you to know that I tried for a very long time to find another explanation. I tried to believe there was a misunderstanding. I tried to believe it was the stress of her marriage, or grief, or some temporary madness that would pass. I tried everything except the obvious truth, that she had planned it carefully over years, and I had been too trusting to see it coming. My name is Lawrence Mercer. I spent 38 years building a property management company in the Greater Toronto Area. Nothing flashy. Residential properties mostly, apartment buildings in Scarborough, a few low-rise complexes in Mississauga, some commercial units along the Danforth. I started with one triplex I bought with my wife Evelyn when we were 26 years old and barely had enough for the down payment. We rented out the top 2 units and lived in the basement, and every dollar of rental income went straight back into the mortgage and savings for the next property. Evelyn worked as a dental hygienist for 20 years. I worked nights doing maintenance myself to avoid hiring contractors I couldn't afford. We were not glamorous people, we were stubborn people. By the time Evelyn passed in 2019, the portfolio had grown to 22 properties and a management company with 11 full-time employees. She died of pancreatic cancer quickly, which was both a mercy and a cruelty. She was 60 years old. I held her hand in Sunnybrook Hospital, and I made her a promise that I would not let what we built fall apart. That promise, it turned out, was very nearly the thing that destroyed me. Because in my grief, I made the worst decision of my life. I let my daughter come back into the business. My daughter's name is Amber. She was 34 when Evelyn died. She had 2 business degrees, a sharp tongue, and a husband named Cody who I had never trusted but could never explain why. Something about the way he listened to conversations, too carefully, like he was cataloging information for future use. But Amber loved him, and Evelyn had always said to let her make her own choices, and so I kept my mouth shut. After the funeral, Amber came to me and said she wanted to be involved. She said she owed it to her mother's memory. She said she wanted to learn the business properly and eventually take it over when I retired. I was 61, grieving and completely alone for the first time in my adult life. I said yes. The first 18 months were genuinely good. She was sharp, Amber. She understood the numbers better than anyone I'd hired, and she had ideas about modernizing the tenant screening process and switching our maintenance ticketing to a proper software system that actually saved us money. Cody was brought on as a contractor to oversee some renovation work. I told myself I'd been wrong about him. I told myself grief had made me paranoid. I signed documents that reorganized the company structure to bring Amber in as co-director. My solicitor, a man named Frank Ossie who'd handled my affairs for 15 years, advised me to take it slowly. I didn't listen. That is something I have had to live with. It started to go wrong in the spring of my 2nd year back in the business with Amber. I started noticing small things that I couldn't quite make sense of. A contractor invoice that didn't match the work order. A bank reconciliation that was off by a small amount, then a larger amount, then small again, as if someone was testing to see how closely I was looking. I asked Amber about it. She had explanations for everything, good ones, and she delivered them with just enough impatience to make me feel slightly foolish for asking. Cody, she said, handled the contractor relationships directly, and sometimes the paperwork came in batches. It was an administrative lag, nothing more. But I had built this company from a basement apartment. I knew what administrative lag looked like, and I knew what it didn't look like. I called Frank quietly and asked him to recommend a forensic accountant. He gave me a name. I made an appointment. I told no one. 3 weeks before that appointment, I was removed from my own office. I want to be precise about what happened because the details matter. I came into work on a Tuesday morning in late April to find 2 people I didn't recognize sitting in the boardroom with Amber. One of them introduced herself as a representative from a provincial regulatory body. The other was a lawyer. They told me there had been a complaint filed alleging financial misconduct, specifically that I had fraudulently diverted rental income into personal accounts, falsified maintenance expense reports, and failed to meet fiduciary obligations to a numbered company that was listed as a minority stakeholder in 3 of our properties. I had never heard of this numbered company before in my life. The complaint, I later discovered, had been filed by Cody. I sat in that boardroom and I looked at my daughter, and she looked back at me with an expression I will describe very carefully. It was not anger and it was not guilt. It was distance. It was the look of someone watching a stranger receive bad news. And in that moment, sitting in the office where Evelyn and I had argued over flooring costs at 11 o'clock on a Friday night, I understood that whatever had been between us, whatever I thought had been between us, had been rearranged into something I didn't recognize. They froze the company accounts pending investigation. My access to the properties was suspended. Under the terms of the shareholder agreement I had signed, the one that brought Amber in as co-director, the one Frank had advised me to take slowly, Amber had sufficient authority to manage operations during the period of investigation. In a single Tuesday morning, I had gone from owner to ghost. I hired the best commercial litigation lawyer I could find, a woman named Patricia Adeyemi out of a firm on Bay Street. She reviewed everything and then sat across from me and spoke in the measured, deliberate way that very good lawyers speak when they are delivering information they know will be difficult to hear. She said the shareholder agreement was binding. She said the investigation would take time. She said the numbered company at the center of the complaint had been registered 8 months earlier, and the director listed on the registration was me, or rather, my name, my sin, and a signature that closely resembled mine but which I had never produced. Someone had used my identity to create a shell company, used that shell company to manufacture a financial dispute, and then filed a regulatory complaint based on that manufactured dispute. The forensic accounting appointment I'd been keeping secret? Amber had found the calendar entry. She'd moved first. The next 14 months were the longest of my life. I won't dress them up. I lost access to my accounts because my personal funds were intermingled with business funds in ways that the investigation had frozen. I was living on a line of credit. I was sleeping in the spare bedroom of my brother's house in Hamilton because I couldn't make rent on my own apartment. My brother, his name is Victor, he's 67, retired CN Rail, made me eggs every morning without being asked and never once made me feel small for being there. There are people in your life you don't appreciate until you need them. Victor is one of those people for me. What I want to tell you about those 14 months is not the despair, though there was despair. What I want to tell you about is what I was doing while Amber and Cody thought I was sitting in Hamilton broken. Patricia Adeyemi is not a person who accepts the situation as given. From the very first meeting, she had said, they built this on paper, and paper leaves traces. She engaged a forensic digital specialist, a man named Kwame who looked about 30 and said very little but billed for an extraordinary number of hours. Kwame found the traces. The numbered company had been registered using a device that logged into my CRA My Account portal on 3 occasions over 2 months, from the same IP address which turned out to be Cody's home office. The signature on the company registration documents had been produced by taking my signature from a scanned copy of a property deed and overlaying it digitally. It was sophisticated, but it was not perfect, and Kwame found the pixel irregularities. That was the first crack. The second crack came from a source I did not expect. One of my longest tenured employees, a property manager named Bruce, who had been with me for 11 years and managed the Scarborough portfolio, called me on a Sunday evening in October. He'd been kept on by Amber. She needed operational continuity, which meant keeping people who actually knew how the properties ran. Bruce told me that Cody had approached him twice about signing off on maintenance reports for work that hadn't been done. Bruce had refused both times. He'd kept the emails. I asked him why he hadn't come forward before. He said he'd been scared. He had a family, a mortgage, and Amber had made it clear that the investigation was an HR matter, and employees were not to discuss it, or they risked being in breach of their employment agreements. He said he'd been watching from the inside for almost a year, and what he was seeing now, the way Cody was managing the books, the way properties were being remortgaged, made him worried enough that the risk of staying quiet had started to outweigh the risk of speaking. Bruce's emails went to Patricia that same evening. She said, "This changes the picture considerably." The third crack was the one I hadn't been looking for, and it came entirely by accident. Amber had a close friend, a woman named Teresa, who had known our family since Amber was in high school. Teresa and I had always gotten along. She used to come for Christmas dinner. After everything happened, I assumed she'd sided with Amber. Why wouldn't she? She'd heard Amber's version of events. But Teresa, it turned out, had been having serious doubts about Cody for some time. Doubts she had raised with Amber and which Amber had dismissed. And sometime in the late fall, those doubts had apparently grown into something more concrete. Teresa contacted me through Victor because she didn't have my current number. She asked to meet. We met at a Tim Hortons in Burlington, mid-morning, a Tuesday. Teresa was nervous. She ordered a large coffee and kept her hands wrapped around the cup. She told me that 2 months before the complaint was filed against me, she had overheard a conversation between Amber and Cody in Amber's kitchen. She had stopped by unannounced. The kitchen was at the back of the house and they hadn't heard her come in. She heard Cody say very clearly, "The old man won't know what hit him until it's over. He'll fight it, but fighting it costs money, and we'll have the company locked up before he can afford the lawyers." She had not known what to do with that information. She told herself maybe she'd misunderstood. She'd continued on with the friendship, telling herself it was a misunderstanding, right up until the complaint was filed and she recognized, with a cold feeling in her stomach, that she had not misunderstood anything. I thanked her. She cried a little. She said she was sorry she hadn't come forward sooner. I told her she was here now. Patricia's reaction when I told her about Teresa was controlled, professional, and very briefly lit from within by something that looked almost like satisfaction. She said, "We have documentary evidence, we have digital forensics, and now we have a witness to premeditation." She said the word witness, the way you might say full house in a quiet game of poker. The investigation concluded 14 months after it had begun. The regulatory body, presented with Kwame's forensic findings and Bruce's emails, withdrew the complaint against me and referred the matter to the RCMP. Cody was charged with identity fraud, forgery, and breach of fiduciary duty. Amber was charged as a co-conspirator. The criminal process takes time. I want to be honest about that. It was not immediate, but the civil restoration happened faster. The court order reinstating my authority over the company came on a Wednesday morning in January. Patricia called me on my cell phone, and I was standing in Victor's kitchen at the time. I sat down on one of his kitchen chairs and didn't say anything for a moment. Victor looked at me from across the counter and I just nodded at him and he nodded back, and then he turned around and started making eggs. I drove back to Toronto that afternoon. I walked into the office on my own with a copy of the court order and Patricia walking beside me. The woman at the front desk, she'd been hired while I was gone, she didn't know me, started to say that she'd have to check if anyone was available. Patricia placed the court order on the desk and said, very pleasantly, that would not be necessary. Cody had left the building 2 hours before we arrived. I found out later he'd been notified by his own lawyer. He had cleaned out his personal items from the desk he'd been using, my desk in my office, and left. Amber was in a meeting with 2 people I didn't recognize. When I walked in, she stood up, and for a moment we just looked at each other across the table. There was no scene. There was nothing dramatic. She looked like someone who had known this moment was coming and had been trying unsuccessfully to brace for it. I asked the 2 people in the room to give us a minute. When they were gone, I told Amber that I had loved her since before she could speak, that I had changed her diapers and driven her to hockey practice at 6 in the morning, and paid for 2 degrees and watched her walk across a stage in a cap and gown, and felt something that I would never be able to put into words, and that none of that had been conditional. I told her that what she had done had not taken that away from me, though I wasn't sure what to do with it anymore. And then I told her she needed to call her lawyer and leave the building. She left without saying a word. Not a single word. I don't know what that silence means. I've had more than a year now to sit with it, and I still don't know. The criminal proceedings are ongoing. Cody pleaded not guilty, which surprised no one. Amber entered a guilty plea to the lesser charge of fraud under, which surprised almost everyone except Patricia, who said she'd been expecting it. The sentencing hearing is scheduled. I have been told to expect a conditional sentence and a period of house arrest, which feels insufficient to me on most days and feels like something I have to accept on others. That is the justice system. It was not designed to match the weight of what you personally feel. It was designed to function, and mostly it does. Bruce is still with me. He got a raise, which I mention not to make myself sound generous, but because it was the right thing to do and I want to be clear that I know it. Kwame sent me an invoice that made my eyes water, which I paid without negotiating for the same reason. Frank Ossie, my original solicitor, called me after the court order came through. He said he was relieved. He did not say I told you so, which is why he is still my solicitor. There is one more thing I want to tell you, and it is the part that took me the longest to figure out how to talk about. About 4 months after the court order was issued, I got a letter. Not an email, an actual letter, handwritten, dropped through the mail slot at the office. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. I have been looking at that handwriting on birthday cards, and school permission slips and sticky notes on the fridge for 30 years. The letter was 3 paragraphs. In the first paragraph, she said she was sorry. Not elaborately, not with explanations or justifications, just the words plainly. I am sorry for what I did to you. In the second paragraph, she said that Cody had been the driving force, and that she had known it was wrong from the moment it started, but had convinced herself it was somehow justified, which she now knew it wasn't. And she was not asking me to believe that by way of excuse, only by way of explanation. In the third paragraph, she said she knew she had no right to ask for anything, including a response, and that she wasn't going to. She just needed me to know. I read that letter 4 times on the day it arrived. I put it in my desk drawer. I have not responded to it. I do not know yet whether I ever will. What I know is this. I am 63 years old. I have 22 properties and 11 employees, and a company that my wife and I built together from nothing, and it is still standing. Victor came down from Hamilton for dinner last month, and we sat in the kitchen of the house that Evelyn and I owned for 25 years, the one with the big maple in the backyard that drops leaves into the eavestrews every October, and we had roast chicken and argued about the leaves, which is a conversation that has no resolution and never will. And I thought, this is still here. This is still mine. I thought about Evelyn. I think about her constantly, in ways that are still sometimes hard to breathe through. I don't know what she would have made of all of this. I think she would have been devastated by Amber. I think she would have been grateful for Victor and Bruce and Teresa and Patricia Adeyemi. I think she would have told me to take care of myself and eat properly and not let the paperwork consume me. I think she would have told me to respond to the letter eventually. I am not there yet, but I think she would have said, eventually, the maple is dropping its leaves again. I am going to go clean out the eavestrews this weekend, same as I have done every October for 25 years, and the business is still standing, and I am still standing, and on most days that feels like enough.